Congratulations on signing up for guitar lessons. I'm thrilled to have you and I'm excited to get to know you. The first thing that we're going to do together is learn how to tune your guitar. So unfortunately, the guitar is a pretty sensitive instrument and there's lots of things that can happen to it just on a regular day-to-day basis that can knock it in and out of tune. So some of those things would include taking it in and out of its case. These tuning machines can get knocked around just by putting it inside a padded case, taking it back out. Traveling with your guitar to and from your lessons will knock it out of tune. So even before your lessons, when you get here, I'm going to want you to tune up. So tuning up beforehand doesn't count. Tune up every time you play. Even things like changes in temperature can knock your guitar out of tune, so that's something that you want to be careful of. Because you might be playing great and you might be doing everything correctly, but if your guitar isn't in tune, you're not going to sound very good. So make sure each and every time you're playing your instrument, you're getting it in tune. So the things that we're going to talk about today are very simple. We need to learn just a handful of things in order to tune our guitar. So stick with me. All we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to calibrate your tuner, right? So everyone's got a tuner and there's different brands and they all work a little bit differently, but overall their basic features should be the same. So we're going to talk about how to set these things up so that you're getting a good reading, how to use them, where to put them, the names of your strings on your guitar. We're going to need to know that. And then we're going to talk briefly about the musical alphabet. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, there are almost as many tuners out there as there are guitars. There are many different brands, there's many different styles, but they all function in the same basic way. In that, they are listening to our guitar and they're telling us what they hear. So the tuner is really listening to one note. It can only hear one note at a time, and it can only really tell you if that note is or is not in tune. So you're going to use that information then to either tighten or loosen your strings based on what your tuner reads. So on the readout, there's going to be a needle, and that needle is either going to be left or right of center. The idea is we want that needle to be straight up and down in the middle on our tuner. That's going to tell us that our note is good. If it's to the left, then it's going to be too loose, and we have to tighten our string, add more tension on it to bring it back up towards center. If the needle is showing us to the right, then our string is too tight or sharp, and we'd have to pull it down. And we're going to loosen the string to do that. Now, some displays on some tuners have an up and down orientation rather than a left to right. It's going to work the same way. You want that needle centered. If it's below center, we're going to tighten it to bring it back up. If it's above center, we're going to loosen that string to bring it back down to center. And most tuners will have like a green light or a blue light or a flash that tells you when it's centered as well. The newer tuners will do that. All right, so on your tuner, you may have some settings that we're going to have to make sure are accurate before we try and tune up. Okay, one of the things that you're going to see when you turn your tuner on is there's very often a 3-digit number on that tuner. Your tuner may or may not have it. If you don't see a 3-digit number, then don't worry about it. If you do, that 3-digit number must read 440. Now, we're not going to get into what that really means. Just know that you want that set to 440. So if it's not set to 440, somewhere on your tuner, there's going to be a button that says calibrate or calib or pitch, or there might just be an up and down arrow. Something on there is going to change that number. All right, so we want that number to be 440. Otherwise, we might not sound great if we go to play with other players. Some tuners have settings for different instruments. You'll know this if there's a little letter in the corner that would be a C or a G or a B or a V or a U. So what that's doing is really, you can set it for different instruments. The C is chromatic, and that's what we want. We want to use the chromatic setting. The G does stand for guitar, but I'm going to recommend against using that because there are some accuracy issues there. When you use tuner's guitar settings, sometimes it's not as helpful as you think it would be. So we want this to be C. The G is guitar, the B would be bass. If there's a V, that means violin. If there is a U, that would be a ukulele. Make sure that this is set to C, otherwise the things that I'm telling you might not quite line up with the settings on your tuner there. Okay. Some tuners also will show you an additional number. Now that number would be the string number that you're playing. Again, your tuner isn't always going to be the greatest at telling you what string you just played. You're going to have to know what string you just played. So sometimes the tuners try to guess. and they're not always right. So that's why we're not going to use the guitar setting on the tuners, because it can really just give its best guess about what string it thinks you're playing. So some tuners are better at that than others. We are just going to look at this from the C setting, the chromatic setting. Okay, but those numbers do indeed correspond with your string numbers. So the numbers of your strings on your guitar are just 1 through 6. The first string is the skinniest string. That's actually the one that's closest to the floor. And as they get closer to you, to your chin there, the numbers are going to go up. So this is the first string, the skinniest string. String number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay? Okay, so we covered the numbers of the strings. Let's talk about their actual letters. The letters of the strings are from the first string back towards our chin are E, B, G, D, A, and E. Now, I know I said that pretty quickly. We're going to use a little memory device to help us remember that. Okay, so we are going to look down at our strings, and we're going to actually start with the one closest to us. And the one closest to us is the thickest one, right? String number 6. And we're going to use this little silly sentence. It goes like this. Eddie ate dynamite. Goodbye, Eddie. So that's going to give us then an E for the thickest string, an A for the next string, a D for the 4th string, a G, and then B for the 2nd string, and then finally another E for your highest string there. So Eddie ate dynamite. Goodbye, Eddie. And that'll get you tuned. Now we know the names of our strings, and our tuner is set to 440, and we've clipped it to the head of our guitar there, assuming you have one of these. These clip-on tuners, these work on actually vibrations, so it doesn't have a microphone in them. Some of the older ones, some of the bigger square ones do have a microphone, and those you'd want to keep close to the sound hole or your pickups on your guitar. A lot of times the ones that are not clip-on will have a 1/4-inch jack that you can plug an electric guitar in to get a better reading. So if you have the clip-on type will go on the headstock of your instrument right there, and obviously you want the display facing you so you can read it. If you have one of the older ones that uses a microphone, you're going to want to keep the microphone on your lap and close to the strings. If you have an electric guitar, you're going to want to plug in to something, unless it's one of these vibration-sensitive clip-on tuners. Okay, so our tuner's on. We know the names of our open strings. The last little piece that we're going to talk about before we actually get into the mechanics of tuning is the letters of the musical alphabet. Now this is important because we have to know how each letter relates to itself. Remember, the tuner's only ever going to tell me what it hears. So often what students come to me and say in the beginning is that, oh, my tuner's broken. It's showing me a C when it's supposed to be a B. What's going on here? Well, what's happening is that string is far enough out of tune that it's reading a completely different letter. And you're going to have to know, how do I get that C to read a B? Okay? So all we're going to do is we're going to look at the musical alphabet. And it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And that's it. There's no H. Once we would get to G, we're just going to start over again. So it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, until you either run out of instrument and can't play any more A's, or your ears physically can't hear that high anymore. So the musical alphabet is just kind of like this cycle. There are many, many A's. All right, so once we get to G, it just starts right back over. And what I find helpful for students is if you write out the alphabet a couple of times, a couple of cycles through it, start at the bottom of a piece of paper and kind of work your way up. And then you can really see how the A at the bottom is lower in sound than the B. You can really see the order of the notes and how they climb and how it's gradually getting visually higher on your paper as your ear hears the notes getting higher too. That's going to be helpful. So if I go to tune my E string here, and if my tuner were to read a D, what would I do? Well, we're supposed to be at an E, but the tuner is saying that we're at a D. The chances are that I'm at the D that's right below that E. rather than the one that's all the way above. We probably won't get that far out of tune without the string breaking. So the chances are we're just a little bit below where we need to be. So all we're going to do is we're going to hit that string again. We're going to hit that E string. And then we're visually going to follow the string until we see where it's wound around the instrument all the way up here. I'm going to follow that tuning post to the tuning machine, and then I'm going to start to turn that. Now students will ask me, which way do I turn it? And my answer is, I don't know, because I don't know which way your guitar is strung. So you kind of have to just watch. If you know how the needle is going to move, strike the string, watch the needle, and choose a direction to turn it. If the needle starts to go forward, well, then you know that's getting tighter. If the needle starts to go backwards, then you know that it's getting looser, okay? So what we've decided here in this imaginary scenario is that I was trying to tune an E, but my tuner was registering as a D. I've concluded that I'm probably not so far out of tune that I'm like 6 letters too high. I've decided that I'm probably just a little bit too low. So I'm going to strike this string here, and I'm going to slowly start to move the tuning machine, and I'm going to watch that needle climb. And I'm just going to keep gradually turning that until it gives me the letter that I need. You don't have to keep striking the string. You don't have to keep picking it. In fact, that's going to give you a false reading. That might mess up the tuner's reading if you keep plucking it. So what you want to do is you want to strike it and keep turning it. As long as you're getting a reading, you don't have to strike the string again. Okay? So we're going to strike that string, and we're going to work our way up from, in this scenario, from a D to an E, if it is indeed that far out of tune. One thing that you do have to keep in mind if you've never studied music before, there are some notes in between the letters. Okay, so what that means is that in between a D and an E, there's actually a little note there. And how your tuner names that is really just up to the manufacturer. It could have 2 possible names. We could name that note in between E and D as a low E. In this case, we would call it an E flat. And that flat sign looks like a lowercase b. So we could look at that note in between as, it's like a diet E. Or we could look at it as a higher F, like a a higher D, like a supercharged D. In this case, we call it D sharp. The sharp sign looks like a hashtag, okay? So we can look at that note, that letter that's in between D and E, one of 2 ways, either as a D sharp, which would show you the letter D and a little pound sign or hashtag looking thing, or it'll show you an E with a lowercase looking b next to it. And what that means is that's like a low E, that we need to keep moving until that symbol disappears. Okay, and again, the different manufacturers choose different symbols. Some use sharps, some use flats. Even within the snark, I've seen some snarks use sharps and I've seen some snarks use flats. So you just kind of have to be aware of what's going on there. Really, we know then that if I'm tuning that D to an E, we just have to be aware that it might show an E flat somewhere in between then, right? So if I'm at a D and I'm gradually tuning it up, now all of a sudden my tuner shows an E, just make sure it doesn't say E flat first, because that E flat is in fact in between a D and an E. So if you see that E in the little b, you just keep moving past it until you see just a regular E, and that lowercase b symbol just disappears. Okay, that's the trickiest thing about tuning, is just being aware that those sharps and flats aren't E's. All right, so an F with a little hashtag after it is not an F. If it in fact shows F sharp, we need to loosen that string just a little bit and get rid of that symbol until it shows just an F without that symbol. So that's it. That is the nuts and bolts of tuning. To review, make sure that you're tuning your instrument every time you play, because it will be frustrating if you're doing everything correctly, but it still sounds out of tune. So we can fix that. Make sure you have a tuner. These clip-on tuners are cheap. They're roughly $15 to $20, and they give you a good reading. And the nice thing about these is that there's no microphone on them, so you can tune these in a noisy environment. We covered the notes of the strings, the names of the strings. So I have an E, Eddie, A, 8, D, dynamite, G, good, B, bye, E, Eddie. E, A, D, G, B, E. So once you know what the string is supposed to be, you can go ahead and strike your tuner. So I just hit an E, and I'm expecting to see an E on my tuner, and I am in fact seeing an E on my tuner. Now it's showing me that it's a little bit past there, so I'm going to lower that down. I'm just following the E string to the correct knob, and I'm loosening a little bit. And I know that it's loosening because I can see the direction that the needle is going. Okay, so the next string, there. Next string should read as an A. And it is, and we're seeing that it's a little bit tight because it's just a little bit past center. So we would loosen that A string until it gives us the reading that we want. And we continue with a D. And there you see we got a G sharp. So that's not quite correct. So the common mistake that beginners would make here is they would just see the G and ignore that sharp symbol there, and they'd tune it up. When in fact, the sharp symbol means that we're too high, right? So I actually have to loosen that until that sharp symbol goes away. And then we come down to a G right there like that. All right. So what I'd like you to do is take a look at the link here at the end of the video and follow the instructions. That'll make sure that you have the chance to kind of review the information at your own pace and ask me any questions that weren't clear in the video. All right. Happy tuning, and I'll see you soon.